Hello and welcome to Conversations in Cleantech, the podcast that celebrates the clean tech industry and the people that power it, brought to you by Brightsmith. I'm your host, Jenny Gladman, and in this 6th season, we delve deeper into the world of clean tech startups and their founders, from inspiring stories and words of wisdom to the toughest challenges. You can expect to learn about how these pioneering startups and the founders at their helm are propelling us towards a cleaner, greener tomorrow. In addition, they'll be offering you timeless teachings to enlighten, engage, and inspire everyone, everywhere to live their purpose. So today's guest studied aerospace engineering, and by the time he had finished, he knew that he wanted to work in clean tech, and he knew that he wanted to tackle climate change. This took him to MIT, gave him exposure to the world of startups, and sparked an idea. So fast forward to 2016, and Cheesecake Energy was born. It's a great pleasure to welcome today's guest, Mike Simpson, founder and Chief Commercial and Product Officer, that is a mouthful, of Cheesecake Energy. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. No, it's a real pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Do you want to give our listeners a bit of a further introduction? I tried to do the very high level, but the who are you?
No, I think you summarised it really nicely. So, as you mentioned, I started out in the aerospace industry. That's what I always wanted to do growing up. But actually, through university, realised that what I really cared about and the really big opportunity for engineers wasn't in aerospace. It was in trying to do something to address climate change, and that's been my fundamental driver ever since. So for the last 10 years, I've been involved in clean tech and trying to address climate change in different ways, and that's what I'm continuing to do, and I'm really fortunate to be able to do that with Cheesecake Energy as my current focus, and a really exciting one too.
Fantastic. And can you, for those listeners that don't know who Cheesecake are, share a bit about who you are and what you stand for and what's the mission?
Yeah, absolutely. So contrary to the name, we're not a purveyor of desserts. We do energy storage. So it's a thermal and compressed air energy storage technology that we're developing. It's a very, very sustainable technology that uses a lot of existing industrial hardware to support businesses. It's a commercial and industrial scale energy storage system. And it's designed for slightly longer durations than your average battery. So this is a technology that fits really well with solar. So you might be producing solar electricity during the middle of the day and want to make use of that into the evening and overnight. And that's the kind of area that we specialize in. So we can store 5 or 10 hours of power from solar and make it available to businesses that want to use that power. And they might want that power because they've got a limited grid connection, or they want to keep their energy bills down, and we help them to do that.
Fantastic. Great mission. And I feel like that energy storage space is so broad. And I think most people think energy storage and think your traditional batteries, but not always the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And batteries have their place, 100%. We've seen incredible kind of progress with batteries in terms of the cost, in terms of the performance, and we see that carrying on. But when it comes to storing kind of many hours of power, batteries just get very expensive. And they also have a lot of raw material requirements that mean that it's less sustainable. And one of our key principles has always been, if we're going to solve climate change, we've got to do something on a big scale. And that means that side effects to any technologies that we bring in also are on a big scale. So we really need to address those now before we've got massive rollouts of these technologies, and find ways to solve problems rather than just displacing them, which I think we all recognise kind of has been a challenge with our existing energy system. We solved massive problems in moving to burning fossil fuels. They're miracle fuels in many ways, except they had a side effect, and that happens to be that we're cooking the planet.
And to put your product into real world context, so for those people that aren't as familiar with energy storage at all, can you talk through a real world usage? How would this work in reality? And I believe that you've just broken ground on the first project, so maybe just telling us a bit about that and where we're up to.
If you were to walk up to a business that had a Cheesecake Energy storage system, what you would see is firstly a fence and a number of containers within it, and that would be where we have our air store and where we have our heat store, and that's where we store our electricity. The reason that we'd be storing that electricity might be that it's an industrial site or a logistics hub, a warehouse, for example, that wants to make use of on-site solar. So a lot of warehouses, you find they've got a lot of roof space, not a huge electricity demand. So you've got all this opportunity to be producing power in the middle of the day, but you're not using a lot in the middle of the day. You'll be using some, but all that surplus can be going into the storage system that allows them to power the warehouse kind of throughout the evening, overnight. If there's electric vehicles, which we hope there are, it's a fantastic opportunity, then the power can also be serving those vehicles. Now, solar and EV is a great combo, but what we tend to see is that this kind of operator, logistics operator, the vehicles are going to be out during the day. They're going to be doing their deliveries. So we want to be able to tie those two up, and storage is a straightforward way of doing that. Similarly, we're seeing more and more that grid constraints are causing issues for businesses. If you've got an existing factory, you want to electrify stuff. We've been told to electrify everything, and we should, but the grid doesn't always want to electrify everything. Sometimes the grid wants to be left in peace. And the grid can be upgraded, but it can take years, and that's something that we're seeing a lot. So if the grid is saying, yes, we can deliver that power, but it'll be 2029 or 2031 when we'll switch you on, well, then there's an opportunity to come and say, okay, we'd like to solve this problem ourselves, and we'd like to use our on-site solar and connect up storage and actually be able to do all our electrification project on our own timescale, not on the grids. So that's, again, a really nice use case for the system.
Fantastic. And going back to the early days, I know you have quite a unique number of founders. So just be interesting to hear how the idea was born, how you brought that team together, and then how you've gone on from there.
I think established wisdom says don't start a business with lots and lots of founders. Happily, we didn't have any wisdom at the start. We've learned everything as we've gone. We started the business with 6 founders, and that's generally considered bizarre, but we couldn't have done it without it. So we've got a technical product with a lot of new kind of concepts and new innovation. We use a lot of existing stuff, but there are new challenges. Any hardware project is going to find its challenges to address. And actually, by having as many founders as we did, the fact that we worked together really well as a team meant that we could share that burden. And for the first couple of years where we were working evenings and weekends, we could all focus on different areas and start to bring the technology to some form of feasibility. And that was really, really crucial. This was a technology that needed funding before we could really start making a lot of headway. So being able to kind of pool resources early on, I mean time by that. Even the 6 of us didn't have enough money to fund this ourselves, but in terms of pooling expertise and pooling time, that was a really, really crucial kind of starting point. And of those 6 founders, 4 are still very much heavily involved in the business. Pretty good ratio.
Fantastic. And you touched on resources there of the other kind, but talking about money, I think it's the burden of every founder trying to grow the business at the right rate, trying to make sure that you've got the right grants or the right funding or the right investment. How has that been for you?
Yeah, so I think we've been incredibly fortunate in terms of the support that we've had from a range of sources, and we're really grateful to all of them. So we had some initial funding from Shell through their Game Changer program, which was, that was a real vote of confidence at the point where we had a team and a pitch deck, but no technology to speak of. That initial, I guess, the confidence to put money into something which was still relatively conceptual at that point was massive, and had a snowball effect. So it allowed us to approach other competitions and other kind of grant awards with some validation that what we were doing made some sense because Shell had supported it. Relatively small amount of funding, but important in starting that journey. We then got some funding from what was then Highways England, now known as National Highways. Again, massively grateful to National Highways for taking a risk on new technologies. They supported 3 new technologies through this funding competition, and I did that because they saw the problem coming. So they were looking at electric vehicle charging at motorway service stations and saying, well, we don't see the solution in the market. We're going to do something proactive and help companies that are offering something or want to offer something to actually mature. That's massive. It's something that perhaps isn't the first instinct of kind of government and kind of semi-government kind of entities to do, but they're incredibly well placed to do it, to take some risk, but actually support innovation by having that capacity to take risk in a way that almost no startup founders can afford to do, but in doing so can unlock really exciting stuff. and all three of the companies that they supported are kind of growing and have found further funding. So it's been a great story for them and of course for us. So that was a kind of fantastic start, and we've been able to secure a number of further Innovate UK and recently Department for Energy Security and Net Zero grants, which have just been absolute rocket fuel. So all of that is a massive boost, and it's the product of a huge amount of work behind the scenes by people perhaps I might even never meet. A lot of kind of people in government that I do work with, but actually in terms of unlocking that stuff, very grateful for all the work that's been done to put that platform in place.
Excellent. And I'm sure there was not a small amount of work on your side either. Sometimes those grant applications go your way, and sometimes you put a lot of hours into something that goes absolutely nowhere. So I feel like you should always add up all the hours and attribute them to the ones that go well. And speaking of challenges, I never like to take away from the excitement of the journey of a founder, but I think it's always good to tell a bit of the honest story as well, so that those people out there that are contemplating this get the feel for the lows as well as the highs. If you had to kind of think about the top 2 or 3 challenges that you've faced to date, or even kind of categories of challenges, what would they be?
So I think the top one is the challenge of innovating new technologies and how you bring technologies or bring hardware to bear in context other than the way that it's always been done. So how do you overcome kind of the inertia and encourage new thinking about what's possible? It's the most exciting thing we do. It's probably also the hardest thing we do in terms of bringing completely new subsystems, new components into being. We happen to be doing this through our early phase through the pandemic. So new technologies were born in people's garden sheds because that was the only spaces we had access to, made out of plywood and kind of little sheets of metal. All that stuff, while it's exciting and it's what the company is now built on, all that took 3 to 6 times longer than we thought it would. And we won't be the first company to have discovered that, but it's something that's certainly real. We have found that kind of developing new technology is tough. It is one of the hardest things to do. It's incredibly rewarding, but it does have all sorts of unexpected challenges and pitfalls. You learn every time you put a new subsystem on test. The second big area that I think that we came to understand and kind of address was it was really around the kind of the finance piece that we talked about. So connecting that with technology development and the pandemic and everything taking longer than we anticipated. There's one place that comes up very quickly, and that starts on the bottom line, and actually being able to adjust and flex as your financial position changes, kind of finding investors, finding kind of grant support at the right times. It's hard yards, and particularly early on when you don't have a huge track record behind you, when you don't have a massive network. We didn't come into this with access to all sorts of high net worth individuals. We came into this with engineering backgrounds that we were using to develop the technology, and that's something that shouldn't be overlooked in terms of how a startup founder might think they'll spend their time. I spent a long time kind of speaking to investors, which I really enjoy. I continue to love talking about the technology and sharing our excitement for the technology. But I didn't think it would take 12, 14 months to do our first major funding round. It's not unusual, but it's a little bit tense at that time. So there's certainly lessons that we learned along the road.
Yeah, I think that's a common theme I hear, and something I know well myself, is that when you found a business, you think you're going to be very in that business, doing what the business does. And the reality is that the longer you're doing it and the more the business grows, you're actually doing less of the business and a lot of the other things that come with it. Sometimes it's hard because I think you end up hiring people to do what you thought you were going to do, and then you have to sit back and watch them do that, and sometimes not as well as you think you can, but you have to let them grow and learn and develop, which I guess brings me on to the next obvious topic for us when we talk about challenges, is people. And I think, again, this is one that people know will be hard, but I don't think they know quite how hard it will be. And actually, we've come through the last couple of years, and work-life balance has changed, hybrid working's changed, people's expectations have changed. So it's a quite a unique time in the last kind of few decades in terms of there being a dramatic shift in what people's expectations are from a work perspective. If you had to kind of think of the growth of the team and how that's gone, what are the things that you didn't expect?
I think we've actually been incredibly fortunate in a lot of ways with the team that we have. I mean, I'm immensely proud of the team, and they work wonders kind of every day. One of the challenges that we have had is recruiting a diverse workforce. So we laid down the challenge to recruiters to say, look, if the way that you recruit is the same every time, you're going to give us the same candidates every time. And we really want to hear what's going to be done differently to give us a broader range of candidates. We are in an engineering space. We're in the East Midlands, and there is a historical kind of bias of the kind of the engineering workforce to be male, pale, and stale. That's something that we can acknowledge, but don't kind of stop there. Building up a diverse workforce is something that we really, really value, and we fought for that. It's not something we're not doing as well as we'd like to on that, but it's something that continues to be a focus and continues to influence who we work with, because it is so important, and we've taken a number of steps to try and address that, and that does involve going beyond the usual adverts and kind of recruitment profiles that we see on a regular basis.
And anyone that listens to my podcast regularly knows this is a topic that I can talk about a lot. But you hit a really good point there about just not accepting the norm, and not sticking with the status quo, because that's what everybody else is doing. And if you are really passionate about it and you are really committed, there are ways to make it happen. But it's a challenge, and everybody knows that, and it takes more time, and you have to look further, but you can do it. And it is one of those things, if as a founding team you've got that shared belief, then that will happen. But it's also great to be able to admit that you're not quite where you'd want to be, because a lot of people hide behind, and don't have that capability to speak out and say it's something we're addressing. So I think that's always the first step, and the second is that ultimate commitment to making sure it happens. And I think we've chatted about this before, and it's something that you really believe in, and therefore I think there's no doubt that will happen. And you're just around the 20 people mark at the moment, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's a pretty epic milestone. I feel like when you're in your first growth stage, that point of hitting 10, the point of hitting 20, then 30, then 50, and they're all extremely important. So, kind of speaking around people, I'd like to talk through your own story a little bit more. The different experiences that you had. So we talked about the kind of academic side, but also I know you had a few different work experiences, and how they sort of helped shape the idea of what you wanted to do.
Yeah, very much so. So I think if you told 16-year-old me that I would go into a startup, I wouldn't have known where to begin, and it wouldn't have been something that was on my radar. And there's a few things which kind of gradually shifted that perspective over time, because it's probably not the natural path that a lot of engineers historically have thought about. Those who characterize themselves as kind of madcap inventors, maybe it was on their radar, but it certainly wasn't on mine. So the things that shifted that, one was I was very lucky to spend a year in the States at MIT as part of my degree course, and there is a massive kind of startup culture. It's considered weird if you don't have a side hustle or a startup or some kind of gig that is a little bit different. I don't know when people sleep. There was no evidence of sleep for that year, but that normalized things a little bit. I mean, so seeing someone that I lived with win $100,000 for their startup company, unimaginable sum of money at that stage for me as a student. But that kind of acknowledgement that kind of it was the entrepreneurs that were the rock stars on campus, not kind of sporting stars or anything like that. So that was a kind of, that maybe planted a seed to say, okay, this is interesting, but I don't know what it would look like. And then I came back to the UK after kind of my degree. I worked at Rolls-Royce for a couple of years doing aerospace engines, and that's where I got a lot of my engineering training. But alongside that, I was kind of volunteering for a local group in community energy, and this was something that it was the Bristol Energy Cooperative, who are an absolutely fantastic organisation, still going strong, kind of better than ever. And that was something that a group of kind of local residents had kind of come together, were committed to doing something about climate change, and they are doing something about climate change. They really are. It's a really, really positive, kind of uplifting kind of model of getting the community involved in putting solar on community buildings. And that again was just kind of saying you don't have to work for a big company. There's really interesting and exciting stuff that is happening because it's coming from people's desire to do things. And then from Rolls-Royce, I had the opportunity to go and work at the University of Nottingham in research, and it was there that I was working with a guy called Professor Seamus Garvey, who had some ideas around. He's got lots of ideas. He's a professor, but he had some particular ideas around kind of how energy storage could look different. And as well, I was working with him that we identified some quite promising combinations of insights, really, that we then saw as an opportunity to spin out into a startup company. So that's really kind of the journey that led to Cheesecake being founded. It was seeing an opportunity, feeling that kind of opportunity and responsibility as an engineer to do something about climate change, and suddenly an opening arising that I was delighted to seize with both hands.
Fate.
Perhaps. Whether you call it luck or fate, I'm easy either way.
Maybe both. Combo. And now you come across as very cool, calm, and collected, but experience tells me no matter how much that's the case with founders, there's still that kind of need to de-stress or find a different avenue to turn your brain off, which isn't always the easiest thing to do. I think waking up at night and thinking about work is a common trait. So we've chatted about your hobbies before, and I was very intrigued. But I'd love you to share a bit more about your hobbies with our listeners. It's a first on this podcast. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a few hobbies, but one that has given me enormous joy is dancing. So I do a lot of swing dancing, and this was something that I picked up, particularly got into in Nottingham, and there's a great swing dancing scene in Nottingham, really lovely crew. But it's just the best feeling to be kind of utterly absorbed in swing dancing. It's brilliant it's a partner dance. You can't think about anything else when you're swing dancing. As a lead, you're thinking about what on earth is my next move going to be. As a follow, you're trying to interpret what your lead is trying to tell you, and kind of feeling the music, feeling the movement. It's just absolutely buzz. So yeah, I challenge any founder to be thinking about investments or pitches or kind of their balance, their bank balance, whilst whirling around the dance floor, and it's wonderful. So yeah, highly recommend. Swing dancing is nice in that it's not really for show so much. It's not about kind of keeping fantastic posture or kind of thinking too much about how it looks. It's all about how it feels, and that's great.
Amazing. And in terms of keeping a positive mindset, so obviously that helps. But is there anything else that you do when things are looking tough, when you're headed towards funding that doesn't happen, or you get people dramas, tech dramas? How do you cultivate a positive mindset?
The biggest single thing is kind of the people around you, and by that, family, kind of significant others, friends. I think probably entrepreneurs rely on them more and maybe thank them less than they should. So I think having that awareness of how much you need to draw on other people around you and recognize how much you're drawing on other people around you is kind of crucial. Unfortunately, being in a startup does take its toll on people around you. It does mean that you're going to be working later into the evening, or often will be working later into the evening, thinking about things, lying awake, worrying about things, and there is a loss of stability as well in a sense, because early on you don't know what the business is going to look like in 6 months or 12 months necessarily. So I think just really appreciating the people around you, the fact that they're able to support you if they are, is cool, and being grateful for that is something that I think is really grounding.
Great. And now, I always like to hear what people see as traits in other successful entrepreneurs. And by successful, I don't always mean that they've had the startup that's made it and it's a household name, but that you're still going strong. You've got a great idea, you're pressing forward. And I guess you're really fortunate to be in a team that's large enough that maybe you see, first of all, hopefully a really good balance in the traits, because it's nice to have a team where you're not all the same. But what sort of traits have you seen, either within your founding team or other founders that you've crossed paths with, that you think make them successful?
I think having that kind of clear purpose is pretty fundamental. I'm fortunate in that I've got a problem in front of me that's bigger than I will ever be able to solve on my own. So I'm not worried about kind of running out of a problem. So climate change is pretty absorbing from that perspective, and it's pretty clear cut in terms of this is why I do what I do, and it's the same for a lot of the team. Coming together around this climate challenge it's a massive common thread across our whole team. It keeps us all aligned. We know why we come to work each day, and unfortunately there's ever increasing reminders of why we're doing it. That's a key point. I think the second point, which is something that startups have the opportunity to do really well, is to keep a sense of openness and kind of trust. The culture of any company is built at the start, and it's not something that happens by accident. It's something that has to be kind of consciously established by example. But startups have the opportunity to set a really kind of open, kind of collaborative work environment that allows people to take the initiative, that allows people to take on challenges and own them, rather than feeling that stuff is dropped on their desk by their boss. Creating that space for people to kind of grow into their roles and to really own them and feel and see their own contribution. I think that's really, really positive. You can get that wrong. Any touch of kind of a blame culture pollutes that straight away. But being kind of really conscious of really recognizing successes and recognizing where people have achieved, there's opportunities for that all the time. And then when there are issues, and there will be, we're doing new stuff goes wrong, that's normal. The ability to come together and share and own the problem rather than look for any kind of blame, I think is a core aspect of building a company that is not political, building one that is collaborative, where the work is the challenge, not your colleagues.
And you touched on an interesting point there, just around kind of the power of startups. And I believe that the power of 20 people in a startup is often hugely amplified compared to 20 people in a corporate. I guess it depends on which 20 people, but your average mix. So I'm always interested to hear from the perspective of someone running a startup and having founded that business, how much impact they believe that startups will have in the kind of wider battle on climate change versus the corporates.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting one. And I think there's some things which startups do incredibly well. I've heard a startup described as it's a vehicle for testing what works. It's a vehicle for finding kind of fit between kind of a product and an application or a market. And that's something that it's easy to overestimate corporate's ability to innovate. It's surprisingly difficult to do new things and take risks in a corporate. We started out worried that if we talk too much about what we'll do, then a big company will just come in and copy us. Well, we kind of learned relatively quickly and had lots of good advice that actually the barriers to doing many things in corporate means that innovation is really positively viewed outside, and there's an opportunity to collaborate. For ourselves, that startup to corporate relationship is going to be a massive part of how we work in the future, because while we can innovate really well, actually to deploy on a massive scale, well, that's a different challenge, and that takes a different set of skills, and that's where kind of corporates can be very, very effective indeed. And we would see a kind of big part of our future being doing a lot of the innovation, doing a lot of the R&D, but then collaborating with big manufacturing companies, big industrial players to deploy the system and to do that globally. We're 20 people based in the UK. We don't know the ins and outs of what it will take for an energy storage technology to be deployed in India within our own office, but we are developing the knowledge of how do we work with Indian partners, for example, to be able to kind of work effectively with them to help them deploy the system, and that's a key part of our scaling strategy.
Fantastic. And my very last question, and because you sparked something earlier when you talked about your 16-year-old self. First of all, I was thinking my 16-year-old self didn't have a clue what she wanted to do with her life, and I think that's pretty normal for any of our younger listeners. There's an element of, I think, no one ever knows quite what the rest of their career has in store. But if you had to go back and give your 16-year-old self a piece of advice, what would that advice be?
So I think maybe the slightly broader piece of advice, because I didn't know this as a 16-year-old, but I think a lot of 16-year-olds don't. But don't rule out startups. It feels a bit scary. It feels uncertain. It feels risky. But at the end of the day, it's just as valid a path as a kind of any other. And big corporates aren't immune from instability either. I've seen that in kind of various big companies, that you can what you might be trading off in stability. There's massive opportunities in terms of alignment of what you care about to working with startups. So really, really strongly kind of encourage that. I differentiate slightly kind of the opportunity to work in startups from fetishizing startups. I don't think they solve all the problems. I think that there are kind of many startups which have kind of not great cultures and are a little bit testosterone fueled and kind of there's too much ego. But there are particularly clean tech startups, I think, have an opportunity to do something really, really exciting, to do something which is kind of positively driven and actually very, very rewarding. So don't overlook the opportunities that the kind of clean tech startups can offer. We do need more diversity in clean tech startups. So this kind of is a call out for anyone who might not have thought about it previously. Do think about it. And it's not just, you don't have to be working solar, you don't have to be working in wind, you don't have to be battery specialist. We hire from all sorts of industries because we have all sorts of different technologies and types of engineering and kind of business functions within our company. Just explore, ask the question, and see what's out there.
And reach out to Cheesecake.
If you wouldn't mind, yeah, and companies like us.
Well, Mike, that was great, and I think 16-year-old you took your advice because you would have ended up here. But thank you so much for sharing your story, and for our listeners that hadn't heard of Cheesecake, go and do some digging and reach out to Mike if you think there's synergies between what you do and what they do. So yeah, thank you for being a great guest and for sharing your insights, and we wish you every success with the next step of the journey.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.